You didn't find this video. Somehow, it found you. And if you're here watching these first moments, it may mean that something very subtle has already shifted inside you. Not everyone comes across a message like this. Not everyone pauses long enough to hear a call like this. Moments like this tend to appear only when a person's awareness reaches a certain depth, when something within them becomes ready to notice what was always there, but previously unseen. And before we go any further, welcome to the Inner Code. If you've arrived here today, take it as an invitation to slow down for a moment and explore something deeper about the patterns shaping your life. There is a kind of understanding that doesn't come from searching through books or collecting information. It doesn't appear simply because we want it to. Instead, it tends to reveal itself only when a person has reached the point where they can actually receive it. And if you notice a slight stillness in your body right now, or a strange quiet settling around you as you listen, that may not be random. It may simply be a sign that you are no longer standing in the same version of yourself you once were. In the next few minutes, you're not just going to hear ideas. You may begin to recognize something that has been quietly forming inside you for a long time. This isn't about convincing you of anything. It's about activating a recognition, something you already carry but may only be able to see when the timing is right. And that timing might be now. Stay with me for a moment, because you may begin to understand why you arrived here exactly when you did. Have you noticed that something inside you has felt different lately? Maybe certain things that once excited you no longer hold the same pull. Maybe conversations that used to draw you in now feel strangely empty. Maybe relationships, habits, or routines that once felt comfortable now feel like they belong to a version of you that is slowly fading. Sometimes this shift feels confusing, almost like standing between two identities, one that you've outgrown and another that hasn't fully taken shape yet. That floating feeling, that sense of quiet disorientation, often appears right before a deeper layer of awareness opens. Throughout life, there are moments that seem random on the surface. A video appearing on your screen during a moment of uncertainty, a sentence you read that suddenly stops you in your tracks, or a strange series of coincidences that makes you pause and wonder whether something is trying to get your attention. Most people brush these moments aside and call them coincidence. But sometimes they are something else entirely, subtle signals that your perspective is shifting and your awareness is expanding. When that shift happens, the world around you begins to reorganize in small ways. Opportunities, ideas, and conversations begin appearing in places you didn't expect. It's not that the universe suddenly decided to change for you. It's that your internal signal may have changed, and reality simply responded. There's an important truth hidden in that idea. You cannot receive something that lies completely outside the range of what you are able to perceive or hold. Just as you cannot read a chapter from a book that belongs to a part of the story you haven't reached yet. This is why transformation cannot be forced. Awakening doesn't come from reading more or trying harder to understand. It happens when awareness matures naturally through experience. And if you're still listening right now, it may be because that process has already begun within you, even before you consciously recognized it. There are times in life when everything suddenly becomes quiet for a moment. Not empty, not chaotic, just still. A brief pause in the noise of the world that is difficult to explain. And in that quiet space, something deeper inside begins to speak. Not with words, but with a gentle pull that says, look closer, stay a little longer, something important is unfolding. If you can feel even a trace of that sensation right now, trust it. Not everyone recognizes it. Some people watch the first few seconds of a message like this and move on immediately, not because they lack curiosity, but because they haven't yet reached the point where the message resonates. But you're still here, which may simply mean you've arrived at the depth where what you're about to hear doesn't just pass through your mind. It begins to open something within you. And when that happens, a surprising realization often follows. Many of the things you once believed were random may have been guiding you all along. Those restless nights when you couldn't sleep, those quiet afternoons when life felt strangely meaningless, those moments when you wondered why you kept circling the same questions over and over again. Sometimes those are the exact moments when life begins placing you on a new path, a path that slowly leads you toward a different way of seeing yourself and the world. Right now, you might think you're simply watching a video, but in a deeper sense, you may be stepping into a field of ideas and awareness that activates something you've been carrying for much longer than you realize. Life rarely teaches us through instructions or formulas. More often, it teaches through resonance, through frequency. And the fact that you're here, at this moment, listening to these words, might simply mean that something inside you has reached the point where the next layer of understanding is ready to unfold. And once you begin to see the pattern behind it, many things that once felt confusing, delays, coincidences, repeated lessons, unexpected opportunities, can suddenly start making sense in a way that feels almost startlingly clear. That's why it may be worth staying for the next few minutes. Because what you thought was happening to you might actually be happening for you. There is an old story that has been passed down quietly for generations in places where travelers and merchants once crossed long desert roads. The story speaks of a strange market hidden deep inside a red dust valley, a place that did not always appear the same way twice. Some travelers said it was crowded with voices and color, while others swore that when they arrived there was nothing there at all. And in the center of that shifting marketplace stood a small stall that many people walked past without ever noticing. But every so often, someone would see it clearly. The stall belonged to an elderly woman with silver hair and eyes so calm and deep that people often felt as if she could see through parts of them they had never dared to face. No one knew her real name. Travelers simply called her the keeper of the book. On the wooden table in front of her, among small antique objects and weathered relics from distant places, there rested something that puzzled everyone who saw it. A book with no title, no visible cover design, and pages that never seemed to stay the same twice. That alone would have been strange enough, but what made the book truly mysterious was what happened whenever someone tried to take it. Over the years, many people had attempted to open it. Some offered large sums of money, convinced it contained secret knowledge. Others tried to persuade the old woman to sell it. A few even attempted to open it quietly when they thought she wasn't looking. Yet every attempt ended the same way. When one person touched it, the book seemed to change shape in their hands. When another tried to open it, the pages appeared completely blank. Someone else once claimed the book became impossibly heavy, as if it had turned into a block of stone that no human strength could lift. Rumors spread quickly through the market. Some people whispered that the woman was a sorcerer. Others insisted the book was cursed. A few believed it contained dangerous knowledge that should never be opened. But the old woman never argued with any of them. Each time someone left in frustration, she simply smiled with a quiet patience, the kind of smile belonging to someone who understands that the most valuable things in the world cannot be taken before the right moment. Then one day, a young traveler arrived in the valley. Unlike the others, he did not come searching for the book. In fact, he barely noticed the stall at first. His clothes were dusty from long journeys, and his eyes carried the tired calm of someone who had walked many roads and asked many questions without finding clear answers. There was no urgency in him, no greed, no sense that he was chasing a hidden treasure. He simply moved through the market slowly, observing everything without expectation. But the moment he stepped near the old woman's table, something unusual happened. The book trembled slightly, not with sound, but with a subtle movement that felt almost like recognition. The woman looked up at the traveler and studied him quietly for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "You know," she told him softly, "this book has been waiting for you for a very long time." The young traveler froze. He didn't understand what she meant, yet something inside him felt strangely familiar with the moment. Slowly, he reached out and touched the book. And for the first time in anyone's memory, the book remained exactly as it was. It didn't disappear. It didn't become heavy. It didn't transform into something else. It simply rested in his hands as though it had always belonged there. The old woman nodded gently and said, "You didn't find it. It recognized you." When the traveler opened the book, he expected to see ancient knowledge, hidden symbols, or secret teachings. But that wasn't what he found at all. Instead of written words, the pages revealed scenes, moments from his own life. Each page reflected parts of his journey, the places he had wandered, the wounds he had carried, the questions that had kept him moving forward, the fears he had faced, the hopes he had nearly abandoned, and the strange moments when he thought he had completely lost his way. As he turned the pages, something deeper than understanding moved through him. He realized the book was not giving him new information. It was revealing something he had already lived through but had never fully seen. The book did not contain knowledge in the usual sense. It carried a certain frequency, the frequency of someone who had walked far enough, struggled enough, and grown enough to finally recognize what had been waiting in front of him all along. The old woman spoke again, her voice calm and steady. "This book is never sold," she said. "Not because it is valuable, but because it cannot belong to someone who isn't ready to receive it. It only opens for those whose journey has brought them to the right point." The traveler looked at her, still trying to understand, and asked the question that almost everyone would ask in that moment. "Why me?" The woman smiled again, but this time there was a deeper warmth in her expression. "Not because you are better than anyone else," she replied. "Not because you are special. Simply because you have become the person who can read it." And in that quiet moment, the traveler understood something that many people spend their entire lives missing. The most important insights do not appear when we chase them. They appear when we become calm enough, aware enough, and ready enough to recognize them. After a while, the traveler closed the book and gently placed it back on the table. The moment he did, it disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. Not because of magic, but because its purpose had already been fulfilled. It had brought him to the next doorway of his journey. When the traveler left the market, he did not carry the book with him. What he carried instead was a strange sense of clarity. The realization that many of the moments he once believed were mistakes or detours had actually been leading him exactly where he needed to go. And as the old woman watched him disappear down the road, she smiled once more, the same quiet smile she had shown so many times before. "It's time," she whispered softly. Behind that story lies a truth that is far more important than the story itself. Life rarely gives us what we want simply because we ask for it. Much more often, life gives us what we have grown capable of holding. Just like the book in the story, nothing about it ever truly changed. The only thing that changed was the person who had become ready to open it. And if you are still here listening to this, it may mean that you, too, have reached a point where the next part of the journey is not only meant for you, but may already be waiting for you. Behind the story of the mysterious book lies a subtle truth about how life actually works. The universe does not give you what you simply wish for. It gives you what you have become capable of receiving. You cannot access a form of knowledge that belongs to a version of yourself you have not yet grown into. Just like the book in the story, nothing about the book itself changed. The only thing that changed was the frequency of the person standing in front of it. And this leads to a strange realization about the human experience. Most people spend their lives believing they are searching for something, searching for answers, searching for direction, searching for clarity, searching for the right opportunity or the right door to open. But what many never realize is that we are not actually the ones doing the searching. In many ways, we are being guided. The events that appear in your life are not determined only by effort or desire, but by your level of readiness. Readiness is not an emotion. It is not determination or persistence. It is something far more subtle than that. It is a frequency within you, a quiet internal state that is constantly transmitting whether you are aware of it or not. Every moment of your life, that inner signal is broadcasting into the larger field of reality around you. And the universe responds to that signal, not to the words you say or the intentions you try to force. This is the paradox many people struggle to understand. You do not receive what you want. You receive what you are able to hold. Someone may deeply desire love, but if their heart is still closed from old wounds, that love cannot fully arrive. Someone may want abundance, but if their internal story is built on fear and scarcity, the opportunities that appear will never feel secure. Someone may want peace, but if their mind is constantly filled with tension and chaos, stillness will feel uncomfortable instead of natural. You may even say that you believe in manifestation, but if the emotional patterns of the past are still active beneath the surface, those patterns continue shaping the reality you experience. There is nothing wrong with this. It simply means that the inner frequency has not yet aligned with the outcome being requested. Think of it like trying to tune into a radio station. When the dial is set to the correct frequency, the music becomes perfectly clear. But if the dial is slightly off, all you hear is static and distortion. The station itself never disappeared. It was always broadcasting. The only difference is whether your receiver is aligned with it. Reality works in a very similar way. Everything you desire, love, clarity, opportunity, wisdom, even awakening itself, already exist within the wider field of possibilities around you. These things are not necessarily arriving from somewhere far away in the future. In many cases, they are already present within the larger informational field surrounding your life. If you cannot perceive them yet, it is not because they do not exist. It is simply because your inner frequency has not fully opened the doorway that allows you to recognize them. This explains why certain experiences in life suddenly reveal deeper meaning at specific moments. You may read the same book years later and suddenly understand something that made no sense before. You might hear a sentence that you have heard many times, but this time it resonates so deeply that it feels like a revelation. You might watch a video that seems to describe exactly what you are going through, as if it appeared at precisely the right moment. In these situations, the external information has not changed. You have crossed into a new level of readiness. Readiness is not something you achieve simply by studying more, trying harder, or forcing yourself to believe certain ideas. It emerges naturally after you have moved through enough life experience to see things from a different perspective. And there is an important sentence worth remembering here. No lesson arrives too late, and no gift arrives too early. Everything appears at the exact moment when you are capable of receiving it without losing it. Yet this is also where most people misunderstand their own lives. When something they want does not appear, they often interpret that as failure. They assume it means they are not good enough, or that something is wrong with them. But very often the opposite is true. Sometimes the delay is a form of protection. The universe does not place a treasure in someone's hands before they have learned how to carry it. You may want a deeply meaningful relationship, but if the fear of abandonment is still guiding your decisions, you are not yet ready for the stability that kind of love requires. You may want financial success, but if part of you believes you are undeserving, that success will feel fragile and impossible to maintain. You may want freedom, but if your identity is still built around limiting beliefs, that freedom will feel unsafe. You may even want spiritual awakening, but if you are unwilling to face the shadows within yourself, the deeper layers of awareness cannot fully open. Yet there is also something incredibly hopeful hidden inside this principle. The moment your internal state begins to change, even slightly, reality responds almost immediately. Not necessarily over years or months, but often in the very moment that awareness shifts. A single realization can move you into a completely different pattern of perception. And that is why you may be watching this video right now. Not earlier, and not later, but exactly when you are able to hear what it is pointing to. I am not saying this to make you feel special. I am saying it because it may mean that you are entering a new layer of awareness, one where deeper insights start appearing in your life more naturally. The real question, then, becomes very simple. How do you recognize that you have reached that level of readiness? The answer is not found in your thoughts about yourself. It appears in the way life begins showing up around you. You start noticing patterns and synchronicities more often. Certain conversations happen at exactly the right moment. Some doors close, yet instead of panic you feel a quiet sense of acceptance. Old emotional wounds that once pulled you downward begin to lose their grip. None of these changes happen by accident. They are signs that your internal frequency has shifted. And that shift is exactly what brings you to moments like this one. Sitting here, listening, surrounded by millions of possible pieces of information, yet somehow arriving at this exact message at this exact time. Everything you receive from this moment forward is not meant to give you something new to collect as knowledge. Instead, it is meant to remind you of something that has always been true within you. You are not here to learn something entirely foreign. In many ways, you are here to remember. To remember that readiness is not something you must chase or force into existence. It is something you gradually become when you release what no longer belongs to you. And the moment you recognize that truth is often the moment when the next door quietly begins to open. Now the question becomes, how can you tell when you've reached that point of readiness? Because readiness rarely arrives with dramatic signs or sudden excitement. Most of the time, it appears quietly. It feels subtle, almost easy to overlook. And yet, if you look closely, there are certain signals that begin to appear in your life when this shift is happening. The first sign is that you begin moving away from a version of yourself that once felt familiar, even though you may not yet know who you are becoming next. Things that once defined you, certain ambitions, conversations, habits, even relationships, start to feel strangely distant. Not necessarily wrong, but no longer aligned with who you are now. It can feel as if you are standing between two identities, one that you've already outgrown and another that hasn't fully formed yet. The second sign is emotional quietness. Situations that once triggered strong reactions may suddenly lose their grip on you. Moments that once caused anger, jealousy, or anxiety begin to pass through you more easily. It's not that you have become indifferent, it's that your awareness has shifted from reacting to observing. Instead of being pulled into every emotional wave, you start noticing the wave itself. The third sign is the appearance of synchronicities, small coincidences that happen too frequently to ignore. You might hear the same idea repeated through different sources within a short period of time. A question you've been carrying may suddenly be answered by a book, a conversation, or a message that appears unexpectedly. These moments are not necessarily supernatural, but they often feel meaningful, as if the patterns of your life are beginning to organize themselves in a new way. Another sign of readiness is a quiet form of sadness that can appear during periods of transition. It is not the sadness of loss or failure, but the feeling of gently saying goodbye to an older version of yourself. Something inside you recognizes that a chapter of your life is closing, even if the next chapter has not yet fully revealed itself. This feeling can be confusing at first, but it often signals that growth is taking place beneath the surface. As readiness deepens, you may also notice that noisy environments and superficial conversations become less appealing. The constant drama, competition, or emotional turbulence that once filled your attention may start to feel exhausting. Instead, you might find yourself drawn toward quiet reflection, meaningful conversations, or ideas that help you understand life at a deeper level. Another important sign is the sense that life itself is guiding you in subtle ways. Certain opportunities disappear without explanation, yet instead of panic you feel a strange sense of acceptance. Other opportunities appear almost effortlessly, as if the path forward is unfolding step by step without the need to force it. At times it may even feel as though the world is quietly reorganizing around the person you are becoming. You may also begin noticing that lessons from the past repeat themselves, but this time, you respond differently. Situations that once confused you suddenly make sense. Conflicts that once drained your energy now feel easier to navigate. The same life pattern may appear again, yet you find yourself choosing a different response than before. That shift is one of the clearest signs that your internal frequency has changed. Time itself can start to feel different as well. Weeks may seem to pass more quickly than they once did, and certain experiences may feel more intense or meaningful than usual. When awareness expands, your perception of time often changes with it. What once felt slow and predictable can begin to move with surprising momentum. Another sign of readiness is that uncertainty no longer feels as frightening as it once did. In earlier phases of life, not knowing the future may have created anxiety. But when readiness begins to form, uncertainty becomes a space of possibility rather than a source of fear. You become more comfortable standing in the unknown without needing immediate answers. And perhaps the most interesting sign of all is this moment itself. The fact that you are still here, listening carefully to these words, may indicate that something within you resonates with them. Out of the millions of videos, articles, and distractions available at any moment, your attention has remained here long enough to explore these ideas. That alone can be meaningful. It suggests that some part of your awareness recognizes what is being discussed, not as something completely new, but as something strangely familiar. If several of these signs feel recognizable to you, it may mean that you are already standing at the threshold of a new stage in your life. A stage where the patterns guiding your experiences begin to shift in ways that are subtle but powerful. And if that is the case, there is a simple way to acknowledge it. Sometimes the act of naming a transition helps anchor it in your awareness. So if you feel comfortable doing so, you might pause for a moment and leave a simple phrase in the comments below. It's time. Not as a declaration to the world, but as a quiet recognition to yourself that you are ready to move forward into whatever chapter is opening next. Let me share another story that may help you understand this principle more clearly. Many years ago, there was an old blacksmith who lived on the edge of a small mountain village. People knew him as a master of his craft. He had spent decades shaping iron and steel, and his hands carried the quiet strength of someone who had devoted his life to learning the language of fire and metal. Yet despite all his skill, there was one thing he had never been able to create: a blade so perfectly balanced that it would become the finest work of his life. The old blacksmith believed that, somewhere inside the furnace and the steel, that perfect blade was waiting to be born. And so, year after year, he tried to force it into existence. He studied every technique he could find. He adjusted the temperature of the fire. He struck the metal harder, faster, more precisely than before. Every time he began shaping a new blade, he pushed himself with greater determination, convinced that effort alone would eventually produce perfection. But each time he finished, something was wrong. The metal would warp, the edge would weaken, or the balance would feel slightly off in his hand. After countless attempts, frustration began to replace his passion. One winter night, exhausted after another failed attempt, the old blacksmith finally set his hammer down. For the first time in years, he stopped trying to control the outcome. Instead of forcing the metal into shape, he simply sat quietly beside the furnace and watched the fire. In that moment of stillness, he began to notice something he had ignored for years. The metal itself had a rhythm. The heat of the fire rose and fell in waves. The steel softened at certain moments and resisted at others. It was as if the material itself was communicating something that could only be understood through patience rather than pressure. The next morning, when the blacksmith returned to his workshop, he approached the process differently. Instead of trying to dominate the metal, he began listening to it. He watched the color of the steel as it heated. He allowed the fire to breathe naturally. When the metal was ready, he shaped it gently. When it needed time, he let it rest. Slowly, strike by strike, the blade began to form in a way he had never experienced before. The process felt effortless compared to the years of struggle that had come before. And when the blade was finally finished, it was unlike anything he had ever created. It was light, strong, perfectly balanced in his hands. The blade he had spent years trying to force into existence had appeared the moment he stopped forcing it. Only then did the old blacksmith understand what had been happening all along. The metal had never been resisting him. The fire had never been his enemy. The problem was that he had been trying to control a process that required cooperation. Once he stopped fighting the rhythm of the materials, the blade could finally become what it was meant to be. The same pattern appears in many areas of life. Think about how often people try to force things to happen before the timing is right. They try to force relationships that are not ready to grow. They push careers in directions that do not align with who they truly are. They demand answers from life before they have fully lived the questions that lead to those answers. The harder they push, the more resistance they feel. But when they finally release the need to control every outcome, something unexpected begins to happen. Life starts moving again. Opportunities appear more naturally. Conversations happen at exactly the right moment. New paths begin opening in ways that feel almost effortless. This does not mean that effort is useless or that discipline has no value. The blacksmith still had to light the fire and lift the hammer. In the same way, you still have to participate in your own life. But there is a difference between participating and forcing. One works with the natural rhythm of growth. The other tries to dominate it. And that difference can determine whether your journey feels like a constant struggle or a process that gradually unfolds. Many people spend years standing in front of doors that refuse to open, convinced that if they just push harder, the door will finally give way. Yet sometimes the door is not meant to open through pressure at all. Sometimes the door opens the moment you stop pushing against it and step back long enough to see the handle that was there the whole time. When you look at your own life, you may begin to notice moments where this pattern appears. Situations where the harder you tried to force something, the more complicated it became. And other moments where, the instant you released control, everything began falling into place with surprising ease. That is not coincidence. It is the natural response of reality to alignment. Just like the blacksmith and the blade, life often responds not to the intensity of our effort, but to the harmony between our actions and the deeper timing of the process itself. As we reach the final part of this conversation, there is one more feeling that quietly lives in many people, even among those who have begun to understand everything we've discussed. So far, it is the quiet fear of being late. The fear that somehow you arrived too late to the opportunities you wanted, too late to the life you imagined, too late to the moment when things could have worked out differently. Many people carry this feeling silently. They look around at others and think, everyone else seems to be moving forward while I'm still trying to figure things out. Or they look back at the past and believe they missed the moment when their path should have begun. But what if that belief itself is part of the illusion? Because the deeper truth is this: life does not follow the timeline that society tries to impose on it. There is no universal clock that determines when someone must succeed, fall in love, discover their purpose, or finally feel at peace with themselves. Every life moves according to its own rhythm. And when you compare your timeline to someone else's, you are comparing two completely different journeys that were never meant to follow the same map. Think about the idea of readiness again. If something important arrives too early, before you understand how to carry it, it often becomes fragile. Opportunities can collapse under pressure. Relationships can break under insecurity. Success can become overwhelming instead of fulfilling. Timing matters because timing shapes the version of you that receives what life is offering. In that sense, delays are not always obstacles. Sometimes they are protection. They are the space where you grow into the person who can actually sustain the life you once imagined. If you look honestly at your own past, you may already see moments when something you desperately wanted did not happen. At the time, it might have felt like failure or rejection. But later, when you look back, you realize that if it had happened then, you might not have been ready for it. Perhaps you needed more experience. Perhaps you needed to learn something about yourself. Perhaps the version of you who exists today is far more capable of appreciating what you once wanted. When you begin to see life through that lens, something inside you relaxes. The pressure to rush disappears. The constant comparison with other people begins to fade. Instead of asking, "Why am I behind?" you start asking a different question: "What is this moment preparing me for?" That shift in perspective can change the way you move through everything that follows. It allows patience to become meaningful rather than frustrating. It allows uncertainty to feel like possibility rather than failure. And most importantly, it reminds you that the path you are walking is not random. It is unfolding through a sequence of experiences that are shaping the person you are becoming. This is the deeper lesson behind everything we've explored today. Readiness is not a finish line that you chase. It is a state you gradually grow into as you release what no longer fits who you are. Every experience you have lived through, every success, every mistake, every unexpected turn has been quietly guiding you toward that state. When people realize this, something powerful begins to happen. They stop fighting their own timeline. They stop forcing doors that are not meant to open yet. Instead, they begin cooperating with the rhythm of their own growth. And that shift often changes everything. Because once you align with your own timing, life begins revealing opportunities that once seemed invisible. Conversations happen at the right moment. Ideas appear when you are finally able to understand them. Doors open not because you pushed harder than everyone else, but because you reached the point where walking through them finally makes sense. That is the essence of what we explore here on The Inner Code. Learning to recognize the patterns that shape your life and discovering how awareness can transform the way you move through the world. The most important step you can take after hearing this message is surprisingly simple. Begin paying attention to your own readiness. Notice when life seems to slow you down. Notice when certain doors close. Instead of immediately assuming something has gone wrong, ask yourself whether the moment might be preparing you for something deeper. At the same time, remain open to the opportunities that quietly appear around you. Often they are much closer than we expect. When you combine awareness with patience, you begin moving through life with a sense of trust that replaces the constant pressure to control every outcome. And over time, that trust becomes a kind of quiet strength. Before we finish, I'd love to hear your perspective. Here's a simple question for you. Have you ever experienced a moment in your life where something you wanted didn't happen at first, but later you realized the timing actually worked out better than you expected? If you feel comfortable sharing, leave your answer in the comments below so others in this community can learn from your experience as well. And if this message resonated with you, consider subscribing to support the channel. Your support helps The Inner Code continue creating thoughtful videos like this, exploring awareness, growth, and the deeper patterns behind the journeys we all walk through.